So we're about to kick off our afternoon session, and in this session we have four very interesting speakers who will bring four different perspectives in terms of how we can grow and develop the biomethane sector here, and all dealing with various different aspects associated with that. Our first presenter is Niamh Hamill. Niamh is the Assistant Principal Officer in the Department of Environment, Climate and Energy. Niamh is an Assistant Principal Officer and is playing a key role in Ireland's transition to renewable heat. Based in the Heat Delivery Unit, Niamh is currently leading the development of the Renewable Heat Obligation, a policy instrument designed to increase the uptake of renewable energy in the heating sector. She is also centrally involved in the implementation of the National Biomethane Strategy, which aims to scale up Indigenous production of biomethane in Ireland. With the policy in a background in public policy and environmental governance, Niamh brings a valuable experience and insights into policy design, stakeholder engagement and legislative deployment. So I invite Niamh to present to you now.
Obviously we've had a bit of progress, so it's good to be able to talk through some of that now. I'm not going to say the name of the department again, Sean, you struggle where I do. But yeah, in the Renewable Heat Delivery Unit, I'm working to Sean Kinsella. I know he was name dropped a few times as well, more on the district heating side. But essentially just that bit of progress that we've had there in the last while. Obviously we had government approval, the RHO heads a bill, or the Renewable Heat Obligation bill, was brought to government and we passed it on the 15th of July, which basically gave us priority drafting. The second key feature of that government decision was the appointment of NORA, so they'll be the scheme administrator. And then again, feedback from industry was that we wanted a reaffirmation of the government's commitment to supporting the biomethane industry, a domestic biomethane industry. And then just a very high level overview. So the Renewable Heat Obligation, very similar to the RTFO. It's a volume-based trading, certificate trading obligation. And that will require suppliers of fossil fuels used for heat, not obviously on the transport side, fossil fuel used for heat, to demonstrate a certain proportion is net renewable. So under the current scheme, we have set the first 2 years obligation rates. Now obviously there is a big push to set that more long-term trajectory. We didn't want to do that in the first 2 years. We've set a 1.5 for year one and then 3% in year two. And then there'll be annual targets based on the total volume of fuel supplied the previous year. And then we have looked at more ambitious target rates. Obviously, the main aim of the scheme is to achieve our RHO. So we've looked at if we're to achieve around a 10% RHO, you'd be looking at an obligation rate of around 15%. So that's, I suppose, just to give an indication of where we want the scheme to go, but what we've actually set in the primary legislation. And then just to kind of talk through where we're at the moment. So there's kind of three key priority areas that we're looking at the minute. So obviously, as I said, we got the government approved for priority drafting. That's underway now. It's with the OPC. So we'll be expecting a first draft back, and then we'll start to work through the more nuanced part of the scheme. There's a few things that need to be clarified in there, some definitions. So we're engaging with the OPC to do that. The other thing we've initiated the pre-legislative scrutiny. So we've engaged the Committee on Climate, Environment and Energy, and we expect to be in with them in and around November. And ultimately that's an 8-week process. They'll scrutinise the heads of bill, the general scheme, and then they'll give us their recommendations. And then it's timed well with the drafting that we can fold that back into the drafting stage as well. And then just to jump over to the TRIS notification. So what this here is, obviously the second part of the scheme is to incentivise the domestic biomethane market. And to do that, we're looking at putting in a multiplier on the certificates for domestically produced fuels that are brought in, domestically produced biomethane that's brought in as a scheme. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, so we're engaging with the Commission on that, and I'll tell you why now in a second. And then the more work here, and I see Frank sitting there, this is the hard work starts here, but essentially turning that RHO heads a bill into that scheme. What does that look like from an administration and operational perspective? So we're working with NORA now to do that. And then obviously we need to start engaging early with stakeholders so the market is ready for the RHO when it comes into place. So just to chat through a few of them. So obviously there I touched on the scheme design. The RHO, the heads of bill, they give you the kind of overall structure, but it doesn't really set out how the scheme will be administrated, and that's what we need to do now. And there's still a few key pieces or key parameters in there, bio rates, a few other pieces that we really need to finalise. So as I said, working with Nora there. Another piece there is obviously we're aligning the scheme with the RTFO, but heat and transport have very different criteria under RED 3 we're working towards as well. So we need to make sure whatever we do in the heat space doesn't have an impact on the transport side. So working with Department of Transport there as well. Same with sustainability. Whatever is happening in the transport space has to be aligned with what's going to happen in the future in the heat space. And then, of course, just developing those administrative processes. So even the online system, all it is in use at the moment, that's on the transport side. So we're looking to try and capitalise on what's in play at the moment and what we can utilise there to speed up that and to be able to administrate it as soon as possible. Stakeholder communications. Obviously, we have a lot of work to do on the legislation side, on the scheme design side, but we also need to be engaging with stakeholders so they understand how it's going to work in practice. A bit more of an understanding on the liquid side because we have the RTFO, be very similar account holders, obligated parties, but on the gas side and on the biomass side, not as much. So key piece of that there is obviously to start engaging now, which we can do. We don't need to wait for the legislation to be in place to actually start talking through how the scheme will operate. So just to put it out there as well, I'll put the details up at the end of the slide as well, but there is a planned information session that Nora are going to host, and we're looking to invite in obligated parties, potential RHO account holders, and then just anyone who's interested in just having a better understanding, and it'll be more from the operational side, how we're going to administer the scheme. That's the email address, and as I said, I'll put it up at the end, and then Sean can circulate the slides as well. But we'd invite people, any questions in terms of how this is going to work. This is the starting point of this information session. The piece on the TRIS I mentioned. So obviously there's a precedent in lots of different obligation schemes for multipliers. But what we're trying to do is put a multiplier on a domestic product. So we've had a bit of engagement with the Commission, and they say, while we're not placing a restriction, we're not saying the obligation will only handle domestic fuels. We need imports. Obviously, the more fuel we get in, the more RESH we achieve. But we still want to have an incentive for domestic production. So how do we do that? So we've looked at a few different options. We feel we've picked the most appropriate and proportionate measure. We brought that to the Commission informally now at this point, and they've said, okay, it's not a block on imports, which would be contrary to Article 34, which says no member state can basically put a block on imports or exports across the single market. But they do believe it's a measure of equivalent effect, so it'll have an impact on that single market trade. So what we need to do is, they say it requires formal notification to the Commission. So it's basically like an EU-wide consultation across member states and then the Commission themselves. Unfortunately, that puts in a 3-month standstill period, but if we do it now while we're drafting, we're hopefully not going to impact timelines there. So what happens is the Commission looked for mature legislation. So we're chatting through with our own legal unit and with the OPC, what does that constitute? So can we notify with the general scheme, or does it have to be more fully developed legislation? And we think we're erring on the side we could notify with the general scheme. Obviously that helps us because we can do that now. So what we're waiting to do now is we're going to bring it to the committee in the pre-legislative scrutiny side, just see if there's any recommendations there that might inform that justification. Also chat through the fact that we're bringing to the Commission with the committee, and then we intend to notify formally on TRIS. It's the Technical Regulation Information System. It's a 3-month standstill period, so once we have that notification up, we can't move forward, we can't enact that piece of legislation. But if the Commission or another member state asks us a question or start to get into a dialogue about the regulation or the measure that we're introducing, that can extend that period. But what we're trying to do at the moment is engage with the Commission as much as possible, develop our justification for the use of that multiplier, and we believe we have a very unique reason for doing that. Ireland is different to most of the member states. We haven't subsidised our biomethane industry. A lot of the other member states have, so they can afford to sell cheaper gas. We can't. We have our government target. Obviously we want to feed into that bigger target of 35 BCM across EU. So we have a few different things, but really what makes us unique as well is the feedstocks, and how, if we get to the 5.7, that's majority of that would be from agricultural feedstocks, and they cost more. and that's why we differ as well. The other side of it as well is we're an island country, we're very different. We're unique in that way, our security of supply as well, that we want to have our own domestic production of these fuels. We don't just want to replace a reliance on on fossil fuels with a reliance on imported renewable fuels. We want to start to do that. And obviously then as well, wherever the gas is produced and injected, we get the savings there as well. So there are a number of different reasons, and the main thing is that once we make that notification, we set that case out well, we engage with the Commission, and we try and speed that process up as quickly as possible. And then just to touch on, obviously Sean mentioned I'm involved in the biomethane implementation as well, so just a few kind of key updates on that side. So obviously it was mentioned before, the Minister announced the total allocation that was given, and part of that is going to support the Indigenous biomethane sector. So we're just waiting now, once that's final sign off, the project allocations within the department, we expect to be making an announcement on what the budget is for that second phase of capital grant programmes, the timelines, and when we expect to be able to open for applications. We're hoping that announcement will come probably in the next month or two, but before the end of the year. As part of that announcement, it says you'll get the total allocation, timelines, but it is across 26 to 2030. It's from the ICNF funds, that's when it will have to be spent. And then, as I said, details on when we'll be starting to open for applications in 2026. There's another key, I suppose, action under the strategy is that supporting local authorities and planning side. How do we start to not speed up the process, but clear out those blockages, better understanding how does planning assess these plants coming in, a more system, just an easier way to look at it. So we're working with Department of Housing on that, just to develop those guidelines, which we're going to be publishing soon. The other side is the communication strategy, and every event I'm ever at, this is always the piece I land on, because I think until we get that community buy-in and the citizen understands why we don't just need renewables, but we need the plants that are actually going to be producing these renewables. So that's a huge piece again underway, and all this work will inform the development of the biomethane information hub. So at the moment we just have a policy page on gov.ie, just setting out the strategy, the intentions, but we want to expand that to a campaign page where if you're a developer, a feedstock producer, or a local community group, or even indeed a citizen, you'll have a portal to come through there and get the information tailored to suit what you need. And then just a couple of upcoming publications. Obviously, two of these were delayed. We have our sustainability charter, a lot of work from IrBEA as well, supporting the development and finalisation of that. It was finalised the tail ends of the summer. We were just waiting on formal sign-off. We need both ministers as it was developed in partnership with DAFM as well. So again, it's all finished. We just need that formal sign-off to publish it. Another document that leads on to that is an update on the 25 actions under the strategy. So we have an action progress report, but we just needed the charter to be published before we could publish the action report. Another thing that's been called for, and quite rightly as well, is there was an awful lot of analysis that went into the RHO. How did we end up with the RHO heads? So obviously everybody remembers we started with consultation in 2021. That informed the scoping exercise. That was a year-long piece of work there. We have that first report. That report then informed the next consultation, which set out key parameters of the scheme. And then the final report is the impact analysis of that high-level scheme, and then how we ended up with the RHO heads of bill. So again, we're just preparing those for publication. But as I said, all reports are there and ready to go, and they'll be available there on gov.ie. But we'll through Sean as well, we'll let members know when those publications are imminent and they're about to go live. I think that's it really on my side. And then just a few key kind of email addresses there if anyone has any questions. I know we'll be here for a minute or two afterwards as well. But yeah, as I said, Nora, in terms of that information session, myself, anything to do with the Renewable Heat Obligation, and then there's a biomethane mailbox there if it's to do with biomethane implementation.
Thanks very much, Niamh, for the updates, and there will be an opportunity at the end of the 4 presentations for any questions that anyone has for any of our presenters. I'd like to formally also just acknowledge the engagement we have had and thank Niamh and Sean and all the officials in the department for their engagement so far with IrBEA around the Renewable Heat Obligation, but also we had a lot of engagement on the Biomethane Sustainability Charter, and it was good to see that there was good collaboration between IrBEA through our member committee that we had on the Charter, and indeed the Department, and a willingness to engage and make it robust, that it stands the test of time from the point of view of environmental and sustainability aspects. So thanks very much, Niamh. So we next